Hello, Savannah Willow here. Um, Today I'm going to be talking about some of the stranger things that have happened to me, not just as a magical practitioner, but as an experiencer of supernatural occurrences. And first, I'm going to start off with the story of the day I decided that I wanted to be a witch. So, my inspiration for wanting to get into the craft is actually I wanted to be like Merlin from The Sword and the Stone, like the Disney movie, and I wanted to be able to make the tea things fly around the room and clean the house with the wave of a wand, because who doesn't want to do that? you know, um, I grew up in a house where magic and anything having to do with magic was considered evil, and witchcraft was a word that was heard actually quite often in very real terms. So, like my father kind of didn't believe it was a thing, but my mother grew up in a religious tradition where they believed that witchcraft was a thing and that people could be witches, and it was discussed in very uncomplimentary terms. So I went to a friend and asked him if he thought magic could be real, because I've got this opposition of ideas at home, where my mother very much believed that witchcraft was real and could be a thing. And my father was very like scientific in his approach to the world and didn't believe that witchcraft was totally true. He thought it was mythology. And, mythology's not real. So I went to this friend of mine and asked him. And he looked at me and he said, "Why don't you ask God about it?" And I was very religious as a young person, in terms of my belief in the kind of higher power you find in church. So I went home, and there was this diving platform that had been for an above ground pool that I like to sit on in the backyard. The pool was gone, but this platform was very solid. It was something my grandfather had built. And it, when you got up to the top of the diving platform where the actual diving platform was, you could see above the house and this grape arbor that my grandfather again had built. The house belonged to my aunt, and they were not living. My aunt and her husband were not living in it at the time. They had moved to Oregon, and they were renting the house out to my mom. So I went to the diving platform because I like to have a think up there. And I started praying in a way that is very characteristic for me. I just started talking to God, and I said, "I know that witchcraft is bad, but can I be either the magic, can I be the sorceress? Like, is that bad too? Or can I at least be the magic person that helps people solve their problems with magic. And I didn't know until recently that this was a manifestation of the man in black, or could be. I'm still not 100% sure. But I got this sort of creepy feeling. So I looked around, first I looked off to my left where there was this giant orange tree, and I'm looking through the leaves, seeing if there's something on the inside of the tree that's giving me the creeps, and nothing there. And I looked off to the right, and I saw something completely unbelievable. I saw a giant fly. Black fly. And when I say giant, I don't mean like giant. This thing was like 6 feet long, had the hairiest fly body I had ever seen. And you could see the multifacets of the giant eyes and the wings, and the sun glinted off of it. And it was, for lack of a better word, it was beautiful and ugly at the same time. And I didn't initially freak out when I saw it. I was just sort of mesmerized by this thing. And then it moved. It raised one of its forelegs to wipe something off of one of its eyes. And I freaked the fuck out. I screamed my head off. I screamed bloody murder. And at that age, my scream was just this blood-curdling scream. It was before I started smoking, and my voice got to the place where I sound like a very husky flame singer. Anyway, because I was 9 years old at the time this happened. So I'm picture 9-year-old me screaming. I took the rungs of the platform 2 at a time, and I ran around where it was on top of the grape arbor and into the house. And I remember I ran straight into my mother, and I said, "Mom, I saw a giant fly." And she said, "It was your imagination." And here's the really weird bit. I remember praying to God that I would never see this thing ever again. And I have not to this day seen it again. I said I would do anything not to see this fly again. Because it was that scary to me. And I forgot that it ever happened until, I would say, about 3 years ago. No, it was longer than that. It was like 5 or 7 years ago. Maybe 7. When I reconnected with my friend from when I was a kid. Turns out he had cast a spell on me to make me forget because it had frightened me so much. And I want to say he did it out of a good place, but at that age, he was kind of an evil person, and he he was engaging in things that you hear about in satanic panic type situations. He went to Luciferianism and became the kind of Luciferian that you pray you don't come across. Like, they exist, the ones that like sacrifice animals and do all kinds of crazy shit like that. They're really pretty rare. He's the only one I've ever known. And he converted back to Christianity eventually because of a personal gnosis experience that happened when he almost died. The spirits that are my personal helpful spirits have communicated to me that this fly being was a type of fairy creature, that it was, number one, what they termed a being from being time. And what that means is that there's like this old Native American myth where all of the creatures gather, and they're talking about who's going to help mankind and who's going to basically hinder mankind or attempt to harm mankind. And it's called being time because it's like the beings that were the beings of each one of those species that could speak were all present there. And they said that it was the type of being that could be considered a giant, but it was insignificant as a giant. And for those who don't know, giants are a type of fairy creature. So, like, if that's one of their flies, I don't want to see, like, the human version of a giant if the fly is 6 feet long. That's really big. But it's also, I found out in my reading, a manifestation of the man in black, which is the spirit that appears to new magical practitioners that lets you know that's what you are. You know, some legends or stories, depending on how you look at it, some stories state that he has a book that he makes you write your name in. Now, I did not write my name in any books because my manifestation was a giant fly. But when he appears as a human, he makes you sign your name in his book. I've never heard of anything quite like it from any other witch. You know, I've heard of black dogs. a friend of mine who's local, his wife saw another giant bug. She saw a giant grasshopper that was like similarly sized. And my own mentor in divination, she saw a giant ant once that was similarly sized. But they were not manifestations of the man in black. They were beings, apparently from being time. I have seen other things, you know. I've had the experience of coming across both werewolves and vampires. Werewolves tend to end up being my more or less friends. I understand from my friends who are, and I'm not going to name names because they are my friends, that they're more or less born that way. And it's not like stories make it out to be, you know, they don't eat people unless we're talking about in the fun way. Vampires are different. And this is another place where it gets scary. You know, I've had the experience of meeting several vampires. The human variety, it's okay to talk to. You know, just people who are into the subculture. If you get really far into the subculture, you come across different varieties. There are those who have supernatural gifts because of basically consuming blood, or because they were initiated into a magical system. Like my friend who made me forget was not a vampire, but he was able to do what he did because he consumed blood. And like I hate to put the information out there that this is possible. Like I don't even know how it works. That this memory charming, I don't know where the information is written or if it's like handed down verbally. I know that my friend who was a Luciferian had a family member who was also a Luciferian, so he had access to source material that was more or less clandestine. But I know it's possible to make a person forget if you're a blood consumer. And there are, believe it or not, the variety of vampire that is in the storybooks that have fangs and literally guzzle blood. I've come across them. I've not had any long conversations with them. One did ask me to go with him. He broke into my house, and I woke up and he was on top of me. And instead of being afraid, I noticed how beautiful he was. Even the fangs were beautiful. And he said one thing. He said, "Join me." I said, "I can't do it to myself." And he said, "Very well," and left. But there have been others. And I tell this story in the hopes that someone out there who is into the subculture, who maybe thinks perhaps these beings exist and perhaps it might be a good idea. You know, the stories being what they are, they make it sound appealing, but it's not. You're essentially a hitman, and you can go about it that way. But once the line is crossed, the line is crossed. And you can't go back again. Once you become unnatural, some might argue it's natural because it's supernatural and it's part of the natural world. Maybe. But I don't agree. As you've got the potential to stop evil people, is true. But ultimately, the price of admission isn't worth it. I've had 3 of them break into my house and met a 4th outside of a Perco's. I was having a burger with my dad and I went out for a smoke and one came up to me, asked me for change. And I saw his teeth. And maybe they could have been falsies. but they looked awfully real to me. I was tempted to ask him what it was like, but something in the back of my mind said, let that one go. Don't ask him to stay nearby. So I let him go without asking him too many questions. Not everybody who gets into the craft has such interesting experiences. Everybody's got a story or two about spirits, mostly. I just happened to get either the really long end of the stick because I've gotten away and had the experience of seeing some pretty incredible stuff, or the short end of the stick because I get to know these things are real. And it's one of those things you read the stories and you think that might be cool. But when it comes down to brass tacks, you don't want it to be true. Like fairies in particular. And fairies are different, you know. The ones that are real, because they live in a dimension that is parallel and shares the same space with ours. They both exist and they don't exist. And they're real sometimes, but not always. And it's my understanding that there are quite a few different types of fairies. There's bigs, there's littles, there's bigs that are little and littles that are big. And whether or not you're termed as a little or a big, it's not always depending upon your stature. Then there's the uglies and the beautiful uglies, the ugly beautifuls, and the order that that goes in makes a difference. And there's the beautifuls. You want to really watch out for the beautifuls. They're not love and light creatures. We are interesting toys to the Fae. They should always be respected. If you make offerings to them, I would advise continue doing that. Don't stop. You're locked in for life. If you have them around, make offerings of permanence, like keeping a bird bath, feeding the birds, or putting some coins around. Also, if you have them, I would advise keeping iron around and salt. I understand lemons might work too, but I'm not 100% on that one. I've not been able to find too many sources on it. But I know salt and iron are a problem for the Fae. Don't brandish it, just keep it around. For vampires, wreaths of garlic are good wards. If you have a fascination with them, take care. They are dangerous. For werewolves, you make friends with a werewolf. They don't change and go out of their minds, especially if they take medication. If you know a vampire that's just in the subculture, those guys, they're not bad. They're just in a subculture. Well, I think I've come to the end of my ramble. And I pray that everybody who sees this stays safe and doesn't come across these things. It's all frightening. There's stuff you can do, but it's not guaranteed to work. Take care, and I will see you all next time.